Welcome back to Zuko Builds. Today, we're building a zero clearance of course. All these sirens. What's happening? We good? I think we're good. Okay. Welcome back to Zuko Builds. Today, I'm building you guys a zero clearance throat plate for your table saw. If you guys watched my last videos, you know I just got this new table saw. Stoked to build a bunch of jigs with it. But we just built the crosscut sled and I felt like this is a necessity to make super clean cuts. I noticed I was getting tear outs with some plywood and this pretty much solved that problem. I'm in a tank top. It's hot here in Cali again, so let's get right into it. For this project, you want to find materials that's about the same thickness as your original throat plate. For my case, it's 1/2" ply that's pretty much identical to my rigid throat plate. Then I'll take that plate and set the fence so that it's the exact width of the throat plate. Now I'll go ahead and rip my 1/2" ply to width, and then I'll take it over to the miter saw to cut it to length. But before moving on, I'll go ahead and make sure that it's the same width as my throat plate. You want it to be the same width or slightly larger so you can trim it down to size after. Then I'll go ahead and mark just the rough length of how long this needs to be. Now let's cut it to length, making sure to give ourselves some wiggle room. So cut bigger, you can always trim it down after. The method I'll be using is just attaching my material to the throat plate via blue painter's tape, CA glue, and accelerator. Then I'll take it over to my router table to use a flush trim bit to route out the exact shape of my throat plate. If you don't have a router table or a router or flush trim bit, you can always trace out the shape of your throat plate onto your material, cut out the excess, and then sand it down to the line. That'll get you pretty darn close. With this method, just cover both of your materials with blue painter's tape, dabble some CA glue on one of the materials, and spray the accelerator on the other. Press them firmly together for about 10 seconds, and that should give you a nice secure bond. Now I'll take it over to my router table and set the bit so that the top bearing is riding along the throat plate, which we'll be using as our template. And once we have that bit set, let's go ahead and route out this template. If you're happy with the way it came out, all you have to do is just peel them apart, take off the painter's tape, and let's move on to the next step. Now I have to route out these little notches. I didn't realize that you have to route these out because all the videos I've watched about zero clearance insert plates, I've never seen anybody do this. I don't know if it's just the thing with rigid and their throat plates or just this model, but it took me a while to figure out. This is actually my second piece that I'm working on just because I wanted to test it on the first one and see if it worked, and it did. So I'll go ahead and trace out these little notches, and remember where you're tracing it, that'll be your bottom side, so just keep that in mind. And let's trace these out and route these out with the router. And here I just have a 3/4 inch straight bit in my router, and I'm cutting about 1/4 inch deep. Nobody's ever gonna see these, so they don't have to be perfect, they don't have to look nice. There just needs to be room for the tabs in the table saw to rest into. And just go ahead and route out all of those marks that you traced out. And you should have something that looks like this. Once again, nobody's ever going to see the bottom of this plate, so I didn't really worry about how pretty these came out. I realized that the plate didn't fit into the insert with this tab here, so I'm going to take it over to my disc sander and sand that flush. Before inserting this into my table saw, I'm going to go ahead and drill out a hole just to make it way easier to pull out so I don't have to struggle getting it back out. I'm just using a 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit for this. Before installing this into our table saw, we need to remove our saw blade and the riving knife, and let's just go ahead and test to make sure that it fits nicely in there. There's going to be some wiggle at first, but we'll drill some holes to use those set screws to make everything nice and leveled. Then go ahead and flip your throat plate upside down as well as your zero clearance plate upside down so that all the holes line up correctly. And I'm just using a pencil and extending the lead and making a light mark, and then I'll take off the throat plate and make those marks a little bit darker. And to drill these holes, for my plate at least, I believe it was a 11/64 drill bit, but just double check your throat plate that you're using and get a bit that fits that hole exactly. For those first couple of holes, I noticed I drifted a little bit, so I went ahead and used the center punch for the rest of them. Then I'll take the 4 hex screws and transfer them over to my zero clearance plate. Now let's take our plate, insert it into our table saw, and wherever there's some wobble, go ahead and tighten those hex screws down until there's no more wobble right there. And it just takes some fine adjustments, and eventually you'll get it so everything is nice and leveled and there's no more wiggle in your plate. You should be able to press down on your plate without it popping up, but to prevent the top end of it from coming out of place, I'm just gonna hammer a nail into it pretty deep, just so that there's about 1/8 of an inch of the head sticking out, and that'll stop it from coming up in the front. To do this, I'm just using a drill bit that's slightly thinner than the nail I'll be using, pre-drilling a hole so that nothing breaks or cracks, and going ahead and hammering that nail in. It might take a couple of tries to get it where you want it. You might need to hammer it a little bit deeper in and even angle the head of the nail slightly up so that it hooks under your table saw. Once you have that in place, you shouldn't be able to take off your insert plate from the top end. You should only be able to take it off with the hole that we drilled. To make our first cut through our plate, I need a way smaller blade than my 12-inch blade. So I'm using my 6-inch dado blades that I have. They're the same kerf as the blade that I'm using, which is important if you want it to be a zero clearance insert plate. And once we have that blade installed, let's go ahead and lower the blade all the way down. Another good thing to do before making your cut is putting some painter's tape where your cut line is going to be. This will prevent any sort of tear out and keep your zero clearance plate looking pretty. Now go ahead and install your plate into your table saw, and to keep it from shooting back at you or moving around, go ahead and rest your fence directly on top of it, locking it into place, but make sure you're not directly above the saw blade. I like to cut through it about 1/4 of an inch and then scoot my fence over a lot closer just to keep it more secure, and raise the blade all the way up. Once you make that initial cut, go ahead and swap blades back to the blade that you are using full time on this table saw, and repeat the process. Lower the blade all the way down, get it started, and then bring that blade all the way up. Let's go ahead and unplug our table saw again, and we need to install the riving knife, but obviously there's nowhere for it to go right now. So I'm just taking a straight edge, marking out the kerf of the blade all the way through to the top of the insert plate, and I'll take a jigsaw to cut out a slot for the riving knife. Remember not to cut all the way through your insert plate. I just cut to where there's about 1/8 or even 1/4 of an inch left at the top, and I might cut this a little bit wider just so there's space for the riving knife to move up and down. And once you have your riving knife moving freely, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. With our table saw still unplugged, let's go ahead and reinstall our riving knife and check to see if it's still flush with the blade. If it's not, now's a good time to make sure you make any adjustments that you need to before making some test cuts. Now it's time to make sure our hard work was actually worth it. I'm gonna go ahead and make a cross cut and a rip cut with this new plate, and let's see how crisp these cuts come out. The only time I ever had issues with tear out was when I was using plywood, but this absolutely solved that problem. Super stoked about this, guys. Hope you followed along. Ta-da! I won't do that again. And my dog's squeaking her little toy. So let's do this again. Cut. Blooper. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed that build. Super fun, super easy. I just made it from some scrap 1/2-inch ply, as you can tell by the the stain marks on it. As you guys saw, the cut on the plywood was super clean. There was no sort of tear out on any side of it. So super happy I made this, and I hope you guys make this as well. If you liked the video, hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already, and share the videos. You know, tell me you like the videos. Let me know what you want to see down in the comments below, and I'll keep making things for you. I have fun. I hope you had fun. I'll see you guys next week.